So let us not to be afraid of suffering. Let us learn how to make good use of suffering in order to create happiness. That's the Buddhist way. The basic teaching of the Buddha is the Four Noble Truths. And the first truth is suffering. And the third is happiness, the end of suffering. And if you don't understand suffering, you do not know how to make good use of suffering in order to make the flower of happiness, which is the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering, the existence of happiness. When we practice going home to ourselves and get in touch with suffering inside, we are doing the correct thing. We get in touch with the first noble truth. There is suffering in us. We have to recognize the fact. There is a garbage in us. And our suffering may carry within itself the suffering of our father and our mother. It usually is. You can look deeply into your own suffering and you can see the suffering of your father, your mother in your suffering. And if we look more deeply, we can see the suffering of our ancestors also. Because many of our ancestors did not know how to handle their suffering. They could not transform their suffering. That is why they have handed down the suffering to us. We have inherited from that kind of collective suffering. Sometimes we suffer and we don't know why we suffer like that. It does not seem that I have not created that suffering for myself. I must have inherited it from my ancestor, my father, my mother. But if you encounter the Buddha Dharma, you have a chance. You have a chance to embrace your own suffering and look deeply in order to arrive at understanding the first noble truth. And that is the second noble truth. Understanding the making of the suffering, how suffering is being made, how suffering has come and settled there. And what is wonderful is that once you have understood the nature of your suffering, you begin to transform. But understanding always brings compassion. When you understand your own suffering, you don't blame yourself anymore. When you understand his suffering, you don't blame him anymore. You see that he is the victim of his own suffering, the suffering of his father and mother. And because he has suffered like that, and he has not been able to understand his suffering, he does not know how to handle his suffering. So he continues to be a victim of his own suffering. And you may be a second victim, or a third victim. Our children can be victims of the suffering of parents. So with that kind of understanding, that person has a lot of suffering in him or in her, and that person does not know how to handle and transform the suffering. He needs help. He does not need punishment. So when you have seen that, compassion is born in you. And when compassion is born in you, you suffer less right away. Instead of trying to punish him for having made you suffer, you are motivated by the desire to do something, to say something to help him suffer less. And that is the miracle of practice. Understanding suffering generates compassion. And when there is compassion in your heart, you suffer less right away. And we have to agree with each other that true happiness is made of understanding and compassion. True happiness is not made with fame, power, sex, and wealth. And there are plenty of people who have plenty of these four things, but they suffer very deeply. So you have to agree with each other, with the 5 mindfulness trainings, that true happiness is made of understanding and love. A person who does not have love and compassion within himself cannot be a happy person. A person without compassion and love can never relate to any other person. He is completely cut off. He cannot be a happy person. That is why we know that love, compassion is a basic condition for happiness. And we know how to generate compassion and love by touching suffering, understanding suffering. And that is why we have to learn how to go back to ourselves and get in touch with our suffering and try to understand our own suffering. If you understand your own suffering, and then you'll be able to understand the suffering of the other person, of your country, of your people. And according to this teaching, understanding suffering always brings compassion and the willingness to help. Can you love someone if you don't understand him or her? No. A father who does not understand the difficulty and the suffering of his son can never love his son and make him happy. Even if he has a big willingness to love. But the more he loves, the more he makes his son suffer, because there is no understanding. So if the father understands the suffering and the difficulty of the son, he can love him and make him suffer less. And that is why understanding is the other name of love. To understand is already to love. And when you love with true love, it means you have understood. Understanding here is, first of all, understanding suffering. So that is why it's very good to look at the other person and ask the question, darling, do you think I understand you enough? Have I understood all your suffering and difficulties? Because I know that if I don't understand your difficulties and your suffering, I cannot love you and make you happy. So if you think that I have not understood you enough, please help me. Please tell me what is in your heart. Please tell me of your suffering, your difficulties, so that I can understand. And once I have understood, I will not make you suffer anymore. And that is the willingness to love, the willingness to understand the suffering. You cannot love someone if you do not understand him or her. And understanding here is, first of all, understanding suffering. So suffering is a very important ingredient to generate understanding and love. And suppose you send your children to a place where there is no suffering. Your children have no way, no means in order to cultivate understanding and love. And they cannot be a happy person. Your children have to encounter suffering. And if your children know how to understand suffering, he will grow up as a good human being. And they will be able to develop understanding and love in them and become a happy person. And that is why my idea of the kingdom of God is not a place where there is no suffering. If there is no suffering, there is no understanding and love either. It's like if there is no mud, there is no lotus. You cannot grow lotus on marble. You have to grow our lotus on the mud. You have to generate understanding and love on the ground of suffering. That is why the teaching of Buddha is very practical. You have to go back and touch the suffering in you and try to understand it. And once you have understood, you suffer less. And you can understand the suffering of the other person. And you'll be compassionate toward him or her. And you can help him or her suffer less. That is true love. So my definition of the kingdom of God is not a place where there is no suffering, but a place where people know how to make good use of suffering. And I'm very happy to have that definition of the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is a place where people know how to make good use of suffering, where people know how to learn to understand suffering in order to generate the energy of understanding and love. So our idea that the kingdom of God, Pure Land of Buddha, is a place where there is no suffering is a quite naive idea. And with that kind of insight, you are no longer afraid of suffering. You are no longer willing to run away from suffering. You stop and you begin to look at your suffering with calm, with peace. And you are able to hold suffering tenderly and have a deep look, in order to begin to understand the nature of your suffering. The Buddha said, what has come to be, namely your suffering. What has come to be. If you know how to look into its nature and identify the source of nutriment that has brought it in, you are already on the path of transformation and healing.